At 2:58 hours, the emergency frequency erupted with a single, trembling voice. Mayday, Mayday, this is Sea Hunter. Venezuelan patrols closing fast. Request immediate assistance. Static swallowed the transmission. Then silence. The Sea Hunter, a 95-foot American commercial fishing vessel, was drifting off the edge of the Caribbean night, somewhere between the faint blue borders of Venezuela's claimed waters and the recognized U.S. exclusive economic zone. Her hull, battered by months of longline work, now carried something far heavier than tuna, a geopolitical spark. On radar screens inside the Pentagon's Maritime Ops Center, 3 small but fast-moving blips lit up in crimson. The Venezuelan Ponta de Piedra class patrol boats had broken radio silence and were closing at 40 knots. They weren't there to talk. For 2 hours they had shadowed the Sea Hunter, broadcasting warnings in Spanish, accusing the captain, James Halvorson, of illegal fishing. But the coordinates told another story. The boat was still outside Venezuelan territorial limits. Now, with engines roaring and deck lights flashing, the patrols fanned out, forming a wedge meant to cut off the American vessel's escape. Inside the wheelhouse, Halvorson's crew stared at the radar, pale and silent. One of them whispered, "They're locking on us." Then the first tracer round hissed into the dark, splashing 50 yards off the bow. The U.S. Coast Guard Sector San Juan Command picked up the SOS within seconds. Protocol dictated escalation: verify, confirm, respond. But this was no ordinary distress call. At 3:02, encrypted satellite channels lit up across the Navy's Atlantic Command. Civilian vessel under pursuit. Venezuelan units aggressive. Possible violation of maritime conduct. In a command suite 1,500 miles away, a voice with clipped precision spoke. Task Force 61, move to intercept. ROE remains defensive until fired upon. Out at sea, beneath a moon obscured by drifting squalls, a steel giant was already awake. The USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, CVN-69, known to her crew as Ike, was running night flight operations 80 nautical miles northeast of the incident. Around her, the USS Mason, DDG-87, and USS Gravely, DDG-107, formed a silent guard. The order arrived through encrypted comms. Civilian distress, possible Venezuelan aggression. Move to grid coordinates November Sierra 452. Execute protective escort. For the Eisenhower's command staff, it was routine until the satellite feed came in. Grainy, green-hued footage showed the Sea Hunter hemmed in by 3 vessels, one barely 2 ship lengths away, searchlights flaring across her decks. One Venezuelan radio transmission crackled through, "American vessel, stop engines immediately or we will open fire." Inside the Eisenhower's Combat Information Center, a junior officer exhaled, "Sir, they're seconds from an incident." Captain Thomas R. Whitaker, commanding officer of the USS Mason, tightened his jaw. He had seen these gray zone games before, aggressive but deniable acts meant to test American response times. Yet tonight something was different. The Venezuelan units weren't shadowing, they were hunting. At 3:12, the Sea Hunter's position blinked one last time on the shared maritime tracking grid. Then, nothing. Signal lost. Whitaker gave the order. "All ships, bring us to condition 2. Launch Seahawks." Twin MH-60R Seahawk helicopters roared off the Mason's deck, slicing through the humid night air. Their sensors swept the horizon until a faint radar return appeared, 3 fast attack boats surrounding a single heat signature. Contact confirmed. Visual on Sea Hunter. Venezuelan craft within 400 yards. From the Eisenhower CIC, the admiral's voice cut in low and cold, "They just picked the wrong fishing boat." Within minutes, the dark horizon bloomed with shape and light, the unmistakable silhouette of a U.S. carrier strike group rising from the sea like an iron mountain. Radar arrays rotated. Deck crews scrambled. The Venezuelan captains, expecting a helpless trawler, now faced a formation built for war. The confrontation had begun. No shots fired, yet. But as the massive carrier illuminated the water beneath her with floodlights and infrared tracking beams, the Sea Hunter's crew realized something that would make headlines by dawn. Their distress call hadn't just reached the Coast Guard. It had summoned an entire Navy battle group. From Washington to Caracas, encrypted lines buzzed, intelligence desks stirred, and analysts began asking the same question. Was this a misunderstanding, or a deliberate provocation? One of the Mason's officers muttered under his breath as the patrol boats began to slow and turn away, dwarfed by the carrier's shadow. They wanted a chase. Now they've got one. The night of November 5, 2025, would enter naval history as the moment a fishing boat's distress signal nearly triggered a hemispheric crisis. And before the dawn broke over the Caribbean, the world would see what happens when small power meets carrier power, face to face. The Sea Hunter didn't stand a chance in a sprint. She was built for endurance, diesel engines, thick hull, and a hold full of catch. Not for speed. But when the first Venezuelan patrol boat broke formation and came charging through the swells, Captain James Halvorsen slammed the throttles forward anyway. The twin Caterpillar diesels screamed in protest. "Keep that Mayday rolling," he barked. "Channel 16, continuous." The radio operator nodded, voice cracking through static. "Mayday, Mayday, this is the American fishing vessel Sea Hunter under pursuit by unidentified armed craft, coordinates." A burst of interference drowned him out. Somewhere, a jamming signal had cut through the open frequency. By 11:47 p.m., the chase was fully underway. The Venezuelan boats, fast, sleek, and armed with deck-mounted machine guns, fanned into a wide arc. Searchlights flared across the black water, beams cutting through the spray like white knives. "They're trying to blind us," shouted the first mate. Halvorsen's eyes narrowed. He'd served 6 years in the Navy before turning fisherman. He knew what those maneuvers meant: intimidation. Hurting. At 12:03 a.m., the first warning came in Spanish. "American vessel, you are in Venezuelan waters. Stop your engines or we will use force." Halvorsen didn't answer. He switched to encrypted SATCOM, punching a code that routed through a Coast Guard relay buoy. "USCG Command, this is Sea Hunter. Being harassed by Venezuelan military craft. Coordinates, 200 miles north of their declared EZ. Request immediate assistance." The response came delayed, faint through static. "Sea Hunter, copy distress. Hold course north-northeast. Do not engage. We are relaying to Naval Command." The sea roared louder than the radio. The fishing vessel pitched through rising waves, her stern foaming white under full throttle. Behind her, the Venezuelan craft closed the gap, their wakes glowing under red deck lights. One crewman swore he saw a flash, a tracer round skipping off the water just off the starboard bow. "Warning shot," Halvorsen muttered. "They're trying to scare us off." But there was no reason to stop. The GPS feed was clear. They were still outside the 12 nautical mile limit. This was aggression, pure and simple. In the combat information room of the Venezuelan patrol boat Guerrero 203, Lieutenant Javier Ortega stared at his radar. The American vessel was slow, stubborn, and refusing orders. The comms officer frowned. "They say they're in international waters, sir." "Our orders say otherwise," Ortega replied. Caracas had been pushing for months to assert expanded maritime sovereignty. Tonight it was no drill. Their mission packet was stamped confidential, EZ Enforcement Operation Bravo 7. At 0:45, Guerrero 203 fired a second warning burst, a line of tracer rounds arching harmlessly into open sea. It was supposed to be intimidation. But the crew's laughter, captured later on intercepted comms, told another story. This was sport. They lit up their spotlights again, flooding the American ship in white glare. The helmsman steered closer, closing the distance to less than 200 yards. Spray lashed the decks. The Venezuelan commander shouted through loudspeakers. "Stop engines. Prepare to be boarded." Halvorsen didn't blink. "Keep transmitting," he told the radio operator. "They can jam us, but they can't erase the signal logs." On radar, the blips were converging, 3 Venezuelan boats pushing northward, forming a predatory triangle. In Washington, the midnight operations watch was routine until the feed changed color. A new alert window flashed: American civilian vessel under military pursuit, probable EZ violation claim. A technician enlarged the map, satellite pings forming a faint dotted line across the Caribbean shelf. Analysts leaned in. One murmured, "That's international water. Venezuela has no standing there." By 1:17, the incident had reached the Joint Operations Center, JOC, at the Pentagon. The watch commander turned to a civilian intelligence liaison. "Confirm origin of the pursuing craft. Visual match with Venezuelan Navy hull designs, fast patrol, Punta de Piedra class. Weapons systems?" Light autocannons. 12.7 millimeters mounts. Capable of lethal force. The officer nodded grimly. We can't ignore this one. He keyed a secure line. Atlantic Command, this is JOC. Situation developing. American commercial vessel Sea Hunter under direct military pursuit by Venezuelan assets. Requesting nearby naval presence for interception and escort. Pause. Then the reply. Copy JOC. Eisenhower strike group operating within 2 hours sail. Moving to high readiness. That was the moment the chase stopped being a local maritime dispute and became a theater-level event. Back in the Caribbean, the Sea Hunter's engines were overheating. The engine room reeked of diesel and burnt oil. The chief engineer shouted over the roar, "She can't hold this speed much longer." Halvorsen wiped sweat from his brow. "Just give me another 20 minutes. The Navy's coming." Above them, clouds were breaking apart, revealing streaks of moonlight over the waves. The Venezuelan patrols circled again, their searchlights sweeping like predators scanning prey. Then came a sound that cut through everything, a metallic thump against the hull. One of the Venezuelan boats had fired a flare that bounced off the waterline and exploded overhead. A sphere of red light bathed the scene in an eerie glow. "They're signaling for capture," shouted the first mate. For the first time the crew felt real fear. They weren't in uniform. They weren't armed. And the men chasing them were. At 1:59, a new voice crackled on the VHF. "Sea Hunter, this is USS Mason. We copy your distress. Hold course. Maintain radio silence unless fired upon." Halvorsen's hand trembled. The Mason? A guided missile destroyer? That meant the situation had escalated far beyond Coast Guard jurisdiction. "Copy that, Mason," he whispered into the mic. "We're holding on." Overhead, an RQ-4 Global Hawk drone from Naval Air Station Jacksonville had already been diverted. Its cameras zoomed across the dark expanse, locking onto the chase, 4 heat signatures 200 miles north of Venezuela. Live images fed back to the Eisenhower's Combat Information Center. Officers watched the Venezuelan boats dart and pivot like wolves. The Sea Hunter was cornered, trapped between them and shallow waters. Admiral Curtis Danvers, commander of the strike group, studied the footage in silence. Then, "Inform Caracas their patrols are operating beyond internationally recognized boundaries. Send a diplomatic warning, but keep the task group moving in." From that moment the operation shifted gears. Radar operators aboard the Eisenhower Titan tracking grids. The USS Mason and USS Gravely increased speed to flank positions, preparing a defensive perimeter. At 2:32 Pentagon analysts logged a new annotation. Visual confirmation. Venezuelan craft have opened fire near civilian vessel. Impact not confirmed. No injuries reported. For 2 hours the chase had been a slow-motion crisis. Now it was seconds from becoming an international incident. The Venezuelan patrols had cut across the Sea Hunter's bow, forcing her to veer sharply. Her nets trailed behind, half cut by propeller wash. The crew could hear the other boat's engines growling closer. Halvorsen gritted his teeth. "If they board us, we're done." He didn't have to wait long. Suddenly from the north, a faint hum grew into a thunderous roar. The water around them began to shimmer with reflected light. One of the crewmen pointed upward and shouted, "Look!" 2 MH-60R Seahawks appeared out of the dark, running search patterns just above the waves. Their rotors tore the air apart. Spotlights pinned the Venezuelan patrol boats in cones of white brilliance. A loud, commanding voice came over the maritime emergency channel, flat, unyielding, unmistakably American. "This is the United States Navy. Cease pursuit immediately and turn south. You are entering a restricted defensive zone." The Venezuelan vessels slowed, confusion rippling across their decks. Their searchlights dimmed. And then, beyond the horizon, another presence made itself known, a rolling, low-frequency rumble that felt more than heard. The Eisenhower had arrived. By 2:57 a.m., the chase had grown eerily quiet. The Venezuelan patrol boats circled, engines throttling down, their searchlights still flickering over the restless sea. They'd cornered the Sea Hunter but hesitated to board. Something had changed in the air, an electric tension neither crew could explain. Then one of the radar operators aboard Guerrero, 203 frowned. "Capitan, radar contact, bearing 057. Large echo. Very large." The commander squinted at the green phosphor display. A slow-moving, massive reflection pulsed across the northern edge of the screen. "Probably a tanker," he said, waving it off. "Too slow for a warship. Keep focus on the American boat." But the echo kept growing. Bigger. Sharper. Within minutes, it filled half the radar scope. The Venezuelans switched bands, X to S, to double-check. Still there. And now a second and third echo appeared behind it. The helmsman's voice cracked slightly. "Sir, those aren't tankers." Out on the water, the Sea Hunter had finally stopped. The engines coughed and died, exhaust steaming into the dark. The crew, exhausted, shaking, watched the patrol boats closing in for the final approach. Then the captain's radio sparked alive again. "Sea Hunter, this is USS Mason. Maintain position. Assistance arriving in 90 seconds. 90 seconds. Halvorsen gripped the mic. "Copy that, Mason. We're holding steady." He looked through the wheelhouse glass. Out of the eastern darkness, the horizon began to glow, not with sunrise but with light. Faint at first, then stronger. A distant rumble rolled across the waves, low and steady, like thunder trapped beneath the sea. One of the crew whispered, "What is that?" Halvorsen didn't answer. He just pointed. From the black void ahead, shapes began to emerge, angular, enormous, backlit by scattered cloud light. At first they seemed like islands. Then the lights resolved into structure. Masts, radar towers, flight deck beacons. The USS Dwight D. Eisenhower had arrived. At 3:02, the 100,000-ton nuclear-powered carrier broke through the mist, running dark except for faint red and blue signal lights along her deck edge. Her presence was colossal, an entire city at sea moving with deliberate calm. On her flanks, the USS Mason and USS Gravely cut through the waves in perfect escort formation, their radar arrays glowing like eyes. The Venezuelan boats froze. Inside Guerrero, 203, silence fell. The radar screen was a wall of noise now, returns too large to make sense of. The sensor officer's voice trembled. "Multiple warships inbound. Bearing 057 to 061. Distance, 15 nautical miles, closing fast." The captain snatched up the binoculars. And there it was, the unmistakable outline of a U.S. carrier's island tower against the horizon, antenna arrays glinting under the moonlight. He cursed under his breath. "That's impossible. They weren't supposed to be this close." His communications officer stammered. "Should we contact headquarters, sir?" "No time. Pull back to safe distance, now." But it was too late. The USS Mason's voice thundered over the emergency maritime frequency, broadcast across all channels in English and Spanish. "Unidentified Venezuelan naval craft, this is the United States Navy. You are operating in international waters. Cease pursuit and alter course immediately. Failure to comply will be interpreted as hostile intent." The words hit like a shockwave. Two MH-60R Seahawks swooped in from the Eisenhower's deck, hovering low over the scene. Their searchlights illuminated the Sea Hunter in cones of harsh white light. The fishing vessel, once helpless, now sat in a sphere of American protection. From above, the scene looked like theater. 3 small Venezuelan boats pinned in the glare, their decks glistening with spray, one tiny fishing trawler between them, and beyond, the looming silhouette of the carrier strike group advancing with the patience of a tide. Halvorsen's radio crackled again. "Sea Hunter, remain dead in the water. You are now under U.S. Navy protection. Repeat, hold position." He nodded silently, exhaling for the first time in hours. The deck crew looked around, their fear melting into stunned disbelief. The Sea Hunter was no longer prey. It was under the wing of a floating fortress. From the bridge of the Eisenhower, Admiral Curtis Danvers watched through high-magnification binoculars. The Venezuelan boats looked like toys in a bathtub, fast but fragile, all noise and no weight. He spoke evenly to his operations officer. "Bring us to within visual range." Mason and Gravely formed perimeter at 5,000 yards. Aboard the destroyers, fire control radars spun into active mode, quietly without fanfare. The message wasn't in words. It was in presence. The Venezuelan boats tried to reposition, their wakes slicing frantic patterns on the water. But every move they made was mirrored by the Mason or Gravely, each shift countered with calm precision. Halvorsen's crew watched as one of the Venezuelan boats abruptly powered down its engines. Its crew stood on deck, staring at the Leviathan now blocking the horizon. Even in darkness they could feel it, the sense of scale, of power. The Eisenhower's deck stretched nearly 1,000 feet, lights gleaming across the wet steel. Every few seconds the faint echo of helicopter rotors thudded overhead. For the Venezuelans this wasn't just a ship. It was the embodiment of consequence. Over the next 8 minutes the standoff held. The Sea Hunter sat motionless in the center, radioing constant telemetry. The Venezuelan patrols drifted uncertainly, their captains whispering to Caracas for guidance. Inside one Venezuelan comms log, later leaked to the press, a frustrated voice can be heard. "They have 2 destroyers and a carrier, sir. We can't approach." The reply: "Maintain position. Do not fire." That line would later be dissected by military analysts as the moment restraints saved lives. At 3:28 the Eisenhower's bridge logged the following entry: "Contact vessels disengaging. No hostile action observed. All U.S. assets holding position." The tension broke like a drawn bowstring snapping. One by one the Venezuelan boats powered south, their navigation lights dimming into the darkness. The ocean settled back into silence, disturbed only by the hum of the carrier's turbines and the slow chop of helicopter blades above. Halvorsen leaned against the bulkhead, eyes fixed on the immense ship that had appeared like salvation. "Ike," he whispered half to himself. "Never thought I'd be glad to see her again." His first mate laughed shakily. "They were gonna take us. If you hadn't called." Halvorsen didn't answer. He knew better than anyone, luck didn't save them. Protocol did. Chain of command did. Above them, the USS Mason maintained station at 1,500 yards, her guns angled harmlessly toward the water. The Eisenhower's deck lights dimmed once more, fading to operational readiness as the carrier slowed to a defensive drift. Inside the Pentagon, the live feed flickered across a dozen screens. Analysts exhaled, commanders exchanged clipped nods. The incident was over, for now. At dawn, a reconnaissance drone captured the moment that would headline every major outlet by morning. A small American fishing boat, dwarfed by a towering carrier group at sunrise, waves painted gold over steel. The photo told the entire story: defiance, rescue, deterrence, in one frame. But to those who were there it wasn't heroic. It was haunting. Because everyone understood what could have happened if the Eisenhower had arrived 10 minutes later. That night, as the last radio logs were filed and the Sea Hunter began her escorted return north, one simple truth rippled through both navies. A single fishing boat had brought 2 nations to the edge of confrontation. And the ocean would not forget. By 3:17 a.m., the Caribbean Sea was no longer wrapped in darkness. It glowed, a cold metallic glow born from steel, searchlights, and the tension of men staring down at each other across open water. The USS Mason and USS Gravely moved in perfect formation, slicing through the swells to form a protective cordon around the battered Sea Hunter. Overhead, MH-60R Seahawks circled in tight orbits, their floodlights cutting white scars across the waves, illuminating 3 Venezuelan patrol boats closing fast. "Protective zone established," the communications officer reported flatly over the comms. "Sea Hunter is inside the buffer. No foreign vessel enters without authorization." Inside the Combat Information Center of the USS Mason, Commander Thomas Whitaker leaned over the comms console. His voice was firm, steady, and unmistakably American when it cut through the static of the emergency maritime channel. "This is the United States Navy destroyer USS Mason. Venezuelan vessels approaching the American civilian ship Sea Hunter. You are ordered to stop engines and alter course immediately. Your actions violate international maritime safety protocols." There was silence. Only the soft mechanical hum of radar and the rhythmic thump of rotor blades from above. Then a distorted voice replied in Spanish, deliberately garbled, defiant. "This area belongs to the Bolivarian Republic. Any unauthorized vessel must comply or face consequences." The interpreter turned, pale under the red emergency lights. "They've refused to acknowledge our jurisdiction. No signs of slowing down." At 3:21 one of the Venezuelan boats, the GC-23 Guaycari, throttled up, its twin diesels screaming. The bow split the dark water, spray lit by blinding white spotlights aimed straight at the Sea Hunter. Figures appeared on its deck, sailors with rifles silhouetted in the glare. "They're still closing in," someone shouted from radar. Range, 400 yards and dropping. On the Mason, the phalanx CIWS defense gun swiveled with a low, metallic growl. Its radar dome began to hum, the unmistakable sound of a machine preparing to kill. Red strobes flashed across the deck as the next command echoed. Condition 1. Weapons free for self-defense if fired upon. The air seemed to stop moving. Every man on deck held his breath. Even the ocean sounded muted, as if the world itself was listening. Then a flash. A bright, arcing streak of light erupted from the Venezuelan boat, splashing into the water less than 100 feet from the Sea Hunter. A warning shot, reckless, dangerous and far too close. On the USS Eisenhower, Rear Admiral Jonathan Connors watched through the electronic periscope, the flicker of the explosion reflected in his eyes. They just crossed the line. Orders rolled down the chain. CRAM missile batteries rotated toward target coordinates. The fire control radar locked, a yellow cursor blinking over the Venezuelan vessel on screen. "We are not firing," Whitaker said quietly, his voice tight. "But they'll know we can." The Seahawks dropped lower, their floodlights burning through the mist. The Venezuelan crews shielded their eyes, and for the first time, they saw what they were truly facing. The emblems of a U.S. carrier strike group, painted large and bright across the machines now hovering above them. 3:26 a.m., the standoff hit its breaking point. One mistake, one nervous squeeze of a trigger, and the Caribbean would ignite. On the Sea Hunter, Captain Halvorsen pressed his forehead against the glass, voice trembling as he whispered, "Jesus, they've locked on." Inside the Eisenhower's command bridge, Admiral Connors' reply was measured, deliberate, every syllable a calculation between peace and retaliation. "If they fire again, we respond immediately. This is no longer a warning, this is self-defense." Meanwhile, in Caracas, Venezuelan defense officials scrambled to reach their patrols. The encrypted channels crackled, but the signals were breaking. Too much interference, too much chaos. The captains at sea were no longer listening. What had begun as a territorial bluff was spiraling into an international incident. The 3 Venezuelan boats finally slowed, engines rumbling like cornered predators. The Seahawks hovered overhead, floodlights locked on their decks. Between them floated the Sea Hunter, a trembling civilian ship caught in the center of world politics. And in that fragile silence, the line between restraint and war had narrowed to a single heartbeat. The Caribbean night fell silent again, broken only by the deep rumble of retreating engines. At 3:34 a.m., the first Venezuelan patrol boat, Guaycari, broke formation and turned east. Its running lights dimmed, its aggression evaporating in the glare of the Seahawks still circling above. One by one, the others followed, their radar signatures fading from the American scopes like ghosts dissolving into static. On board the USS Mason, the tension snapped like a cable under strain. Officers exhaled. The red lights in the Combat Information Center softened to amber. Weapons systems were powered down, but not disarmed. The air still carried the charge of what could have been a war. "All Venezuelan contacts reversing course," reported the tactical watch officer. "No further aggressive maneuvers detected." Commander Whitaker leaned back, hands on the edge of the console. His voice came out low but steady. "Keep them on radar until they're clear of the exclusion line. Then we stand down." Outside, under the pale shimmer of dawn, the Sea Hunter floated between titans. The waves around her were calm now, the sea lit gold by the rising sun. A Coast Guard liaison aboard the Mason relayed final instructions to the fisherman's captain. "Maintain heading northwest. You are under U.S. Navy escort until clear of disputed waters." For the exhausted crew of the Sea Hunter, it was over. For Washington and Caracas, it was just beginning. By mid-morning, the story had already reached the Pentagon Situation Room. Satellite feeds, radar logs, encrypted radio transcripts, all compiled and verified. Within hours, the United States publicly released the USS Eisenhower Strike Group's operational log, documenting the Venezuelan pursuit in stark detail. The message was unmistakable. An unarmed American civilian vessel was harassed in international waters, and the Navy acted to protect it. White House Press Secretary Aaron Callahan stepped before cameras that afternoon, voice clipped, deliberate. The United States considers the attempted interception of the fishing vessel Sea Hunter an act of state piracy, a violation of maritime law and a reckless provocation. In Caracas, the reaction was furious. Venezuelan Defense Minister Jorge Velázquez held a defiant press conference flanked by national flags. His words were heavy with accusation. The United States has once again violated our sovereignty with a show of imperial aggression. Deploying a carrier strike group near our coast is an intolerable act of intimidation. Within hours, both nations raised their alert levels. U.S. surveillance aircraft increased patrols over the southern Caribbean, while Venezuela moved missile batteries closer to its coastline. The Organization of American States called for restraint. But behind closed doors, intelligence analysts whispered a colder truth. One wrong interpretation, one misread radar ping, and this could have been a naval war. In the weeks that followed, military academies quietly dissected the incident. It became a case study, not in victory but in brinkmanship. How a single fishing boat, a vessel built to harvest tuna and shrimp, had nearly ignited a conflict between two nations. Admiral Connors, debriefing his staff aboard the Eisenhower, summed it up in words later quoted across defense journals. It's never the missiles that start wars. It's the moments when men forget how close peace already is. The episode forced both governments to re-examine their rules of engagement, ROE, in gray zones, those murky boundaries where civil, military, and political authority blur into one another. To the U.S., it reaffirmed the deterrence doctrine. Overwhelming presence can prevent bloodshed. To Venezuela, it was a reminder of how fragile defiance becomes when faced with power measured in carrier groups and radar locks. And to the world, it was a silent warning that in modern warfare, the first battle is often fought through confusion, pride, and miscalculation, long before the first shot is ever fired. As the Sea Hunter disappeared beyond the horizon, escorted by the giants of steel that had come to save it, the ocean reclaimed its calm. The confrontation faded, but not the message it carried.